So we're going to go ahead and do a beer and movie pairing now. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. This is the time in the show when we do beer and movie pairings. Today we're going to talk about a beer that is made locally in St. Louis. It's from the Urban Chestnut Brewery, and it is their German Pilsner, obviously, Stammtisch. This is a very good, very traditional interpretation of the style. That should come as no surprise to anyone who's familiar with Urban Chestnut and their founder and brewmaster, Florian Kuplant. This is a guy with brewing in his blood. Not beer in his blood, that would describe nearly all of us, but brewing in his blood. Born in Germany, he has worked for breweries in Bavaria, Belgium, and England. He has a master's degree in brewing science from the University of Munich. He also worked for years at Anheuser-Busch, where he honed his skills at batch consistency, quality assurance, and yeast propagation and control. That's all from UCBC's website. I'll put a link in the description for those of you that want to read his bio in full. But long story short, Florian is a very talented brewer who specializes in traditional beer styles done right. UCBC does some experimental beers too, but their bread and butter is classic beer styles, no doubt. And Stammtisch is one of their best. It is bright and golden with a perfect amount of carbonation. It tastes grainy and bready, but with a nice, grassy, bitter hoppiness that helps it finish clean and crisp. You know what this beer is supposed to be. I just spent half an hour talking about it. And the Stammtisch is exactly that. It's a perfect interpretation of a German Pils. I mean, perfect. Whether that excites you or not is more subjective, but you can't argue the skill and attention to detail that went into this beer's inception and production. Or I don't know, maybe you can. Maybe you can argue anything. And welcome the chance to do so. That's my weak attempt at leading the conversation elsewhere, because now I want to talk about the meaning of the word Stammtisch. Urban Chestnut has a habit of giving its beers oddball German names. They have, at one point or another, had beers with such fun names as Zwickel, Schnickelfritz, Kudam, Hopfen, Klein Manneken, Dorfbier, Schlosssturm, Ochsenbrau, Hollermoffel, and Wackelschwaf. And by all means, go ahead and let me know how many of those I mispronounced. I took French in high school, not German. But Stammtisch is essentially named after a friendly get-together. It's an informal group meeting, held on a regular basis, where you hang out and have a beer. It can also describe the table at which said meeting takes place. A Stammtisch can involve socializing, playing cards, having political discussions or philosophical debates, pretty much anything you like. The main objective is to spend time with others in your community, to socialize, and to discuss the issues of the day. It promotes healthy, civil discourse, where people might be allowed to disagree with one another in a safe setting, free from judgment and scorn. Sounds amazing, right? Especially with the state of the world these days. We're all so quick to judge, to label people, to put them in a box, that it's hard to have a real conversation about anything. People can't even be chill during the holidays anymore with their own families. Shit is getting seriously out of hand. So yeah, a Stammtisch sounds like a very cool concept. Healthy discourse is how we overcome our common hurdles. It's how we learn as a society. To learn is to grow, and growing is kind of the whole point of living. That's why we play all 60 minutes, to borrow an analogy from football. Hopefully the NFL doesn't send me a cease and desist for that one. They're a litigious bunch. But by talking to people from different backgrounds, different upbringings, different social statuses, we can learn to see things from their perspective. Just because all your straight, white, affluent friends think the same way you do, Kyle, doesn't mean that everyone thinks that way, You need to diversify your friends like you diversify your investments. A simple injection of diversity can make us all more compassionate on an individual level, which will then, hopefully, translate to a more compassionate society. Stammtisch. Better living through alcohol consumption? Is that what I'm saying right now? Well, I'm not saying that we can Stammtisch our way out of the issues plaguing our society. We're not going to solve climate change sitting around drinking beer. But there are tons of social issues that would benefit greatly from an honest, civil dialogue about them. The more we understand what the problem is, the more readily apparent a solution becomes. But, having said all that, a Stammtisch doesn't have to be a serious enterprise. It's also about having a good time. Healthy discussion doesn't have to mean a stodgy debate on abortion rights or gun control. It can also be a place to discuss movies. You may have forgotten by now, what with my lengthy digression there, but we're also talking about movies. One movie in particular, one that would be a great one to discuss and interpret and analyze in a Stammtisch type setting. Today, we're Stammtisching about the 2008 German film The Baader-Meinhof Complex. This is a movie based on a nonfiction book of the same name that tells the story of the early days of the RAF, the Red Army faction. Also known as the Baader-Meinhof Group, this was a West German, far-left militant organization, also known as a terrorist organization, that engaged in a series of bombings, kidnappings, bank robberies, assassinations, and shootouts with police over the course of 3 decades. The movie centers on the first generation of the RAF, the founders of the group, who were active throughout the 1970s. The original members of the RAF never referred to themselves as the Baader-Meinhof Group. This was the name given to them by the media and the government. The group came about when efforts to weed out former Nazis from the German government were proving ineffective. The German youth, its college students and whatnot, were interested in issues like racism and anti-imperialism and women's liberation. They felt alienated from their parents, as their parents were the Nazi generation. That's got to fuck with your mind. How do you trust anyone after that? That was largely how the RAF justified the level of violence they used while they were doing their thing. The RAF robbed banks to support its efforts. They would bomb buildings, burn buildings, kidnap or straight up assassinate prominent German politicians and businessmen. Their goal was to trigger an aggressive response from the government, which they believed would get more people on their side, sparking a political revolution. The thing is, they were robbing banks and killing innocent civilians, not to mention police and firefighters and other first responders. They were terrorizing the entire population, not just the government. People were simply not on board for the RAF's particular brand of violent revolt. Most of the roughly 22 founding members of the RAF were imprisoned by 1972. All of the leading figures of the group, Meinhof and Baader included, were dead by 1977. This was after an unsuccessful attempt to have some of them released as ransom for a plane that was hijacked by members of the PFLP, who were allies of the RAF. That's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. When that attempt failed, Baader and a few other RAF members were said to have committed suicide, but the circumstances are a little wonky on that, so who's to say if it was a true suicide or a staged event? That's the very tip of the iceberg on this one. The RAF's actions have been depicted by numerous movies over the years. Rainer Werner Fassbinder made a dark comedy inspired by the RAF in 1979 called The Third Generation. It was a controversial movie upon its release, naturally, but it has since been recognized as one of Fassbinder's best movies. I haven't seen that one, unfortunately, but I think I'm going to track it down after watching the Baader-Meinhof Complex. I picked this one as the movie to pair with Stammtisch because there's just so much material here that is worthy of debate. This movie is very well made, it's exciting, it's funny when it tries to be, it's brutal and violent, and most importantly, it doesn't canonize or demonize its protagonists. It merely presents their actions and lets the audience make their own judgments. Are the members of the RAF justified in their actions? Are they just violent terrorists? Is Meinhof a monster for thinking about sending her children to a camp to become suicide bombers? The movie won't answer those questions for you. What it will do is present these events in a thrilling, engaging way. It will be as honest as it can about what happened, and if there's any doubt about the validity of what it presents, it will let you know that too. I personally found it surprising how little sympathy I had for the members of the RAF. I mean, sure, they're killing people and terrorizing people, but they're doing it, supposedly, for a purpose. A purpose that, on its face, is a noble one. They want to keep corruption and hate out of their government. But really, they're just kind of dumb young people who don't know what they're doing. They're just flying by the seat of their pants. That's my read on the situation, anyway. I would say the one character the movie is most interested in is Horst Herold, the police investigator played by Bruno Ganz. He's got a small role, but he is the one man on the side of law who tries to understand the motives of the RAF. He knows that if he understands their thought process, he can catch them. He's a very compelling character, and he's really the only person who it's easy to side with. It doesn't hurt that Bruno Ganz is a mesmerizing actor, whether he's playing a policeman as he is here, or a bunker-dwelling Adolf Hitler in Downfall, or an angel who falls to earth in Wings of Desire. He has such a presence when he's on screen that it's hard to look away. And there are plenty of times during this movie that you'll want to look away. It's not an easy watch. But it is compelling and fascinating, and it can be informative for people outside of Germany who have maybe never heard of the RAF. It's definitely a movie that will inspire some lengthy conversations afterwards. It's not a movie that you just watch and forget about, it's not a popcorn movie. It will get in your head and make you question your alliances. You'll wonder what you would do in a similar situation. Would you embrace violence to prevent evil from seeping back into your country? Would you turn a blind eye to it and trust that your government knows what it's doing? What's the more patriotic response? Would you sacrifice everything for an ideal? That's a great topic for a Stammtisch, right? Just think of the heady debates you would get into. It would be great. You know what else would be great? If you were to rate and review and subscribe to the podcast. That would be so great. If you have any strong feelings about the Baader-Meinhof complex that you'd like to share with me personally, you can always email them to me at beerblockbuster@gmail.com. You can also reach out via social media. The show is at Beer Blockbuster on Facebook and Twitter. If there's a hot new social media app that we should jump on, let us know. And that's that. German Pills in the books. Another beer style tackled. We'll be back soon to do it all over again, I assure you. In the meantime, stay safe out there. Don't join any terrorist organizations if you can help it. I'll talk to you soon. Good night, nerds.